faith, family, business, adventure. This is the Phoenix Podcast with Ken Sharpe.
Thank you. Thank you for listening in, viewers and guests. We are a special day today here in Harare. It's the inaugural show of the Phoenix Podcast with Ken Sharpe, yours truly. And I'm sitting here today with a very special guest. But before I introduce him, I just want to make this comment. We're here to talk about fintech, technology. We're living in the 21st century, and it's really a different era. The fuel carbon era is over. We're now living in the data era. If you're not in data, then you're not in the global economy. And sitting where I'm sitting right now today, you'll be very surprised to hear that I'm actually in Harare, in Herald House. Of all places, I would never expect to be sitting in this studio. But it truly is, born from the ashes. We have the most modern technology around us and a beautiful place to be. Again, thank you to Herald for having us. Victor Mapunga, thank you for joining me today, sir.
Honor to be here.
You're Zimbabwe's leading technology serial entrepreneur, having built award-winning solutions in blockchain, crypto, fintech, and e-commerce. You're the founder and CEO of FlexID, a blockchain-powered digital identity wallet which aims to unlock financial, insurance, healthcare, and government services to over 400 million Africans. You are the first Zimbabwean entrepreneur to be inaugurated into the World Economic Forum's Technology Pioneers in Davos, Switzerland, as one of the 100 global tech companies in innovation. You're a speaker at Global Technology Governance Retreat in Silicon Valley, California, Massachusetts, MIT, Africa's Innovate Summits in Boston, Consensus in Austin, Texas, among others in Singapore and Italy. You've received training in entrepreneurship from Yale University, MIT, and King's College. I believe you also operate your technology group from Singapore, Hong Kong, Harare, South Africa, and I heard Dubai. And all of this whilst you were in your 20s. What an incredible record it is. And it's truly an honor to have you on the show today. But before I get talking about your company, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where you're from, where were you born, what does home mean to you, a little bit about your culture.
Yeah. Firstly, very honored to be here. I think the story of Africa is really a story about rising from the ashes. So I was born and raised in a small town on the eastern side of Zimbabwe called Mutare. Some people call it the Diamond City or the City of Diamonds. And I did have jewels of parents. Both my mom and my dad were entrepreneurs, self-made individuals. They didn't manage even to finish high school, but they ensured that, my siblings and I had, the best education, and they managed to build a really phenomenal business in commodities trading. So I grew up really in this environment where building things was very natural, and my parents extremely supportive. I took up an extreme interest in technology at a very young age. So I would go to my dad's office and there were all these old computers. And I had full access to doing whatever I wanted. So, I started tinkering with all these devices at such a young age until, I asked my parents, I said, look, guys, I don't think I can keep going to the office back and forth. Can you guys buy me a laptop? And I was in 5th grade at the time. And that negotiation lasted for a few months. And one day when I came back from school, there was this compact box with a laptop inside, and I just jumped in the air.
So that was a happy day.
That was a really happy day for me. I was extremely excited because for me, I'd really wanted to experiment with a lot of the things I'd been learning online and just practice them at home. So it's during this time that I just I would go to the internet, right? And there's this thing called Google. Now, a lot of people think they understand Google, but I learned the power of Google when I was really young. I realized that if you type whatever you wanted in it, it would give you the responses, that were appropriate for you. So I started typing and searching things that would make me very productive. So I'll just search up, free, computer science courses. Until one day, I actually discovered a free course that was being offered at Harvard University called CS50. So it was an intro into programming for first-year students. But then the professor there, Professor David Malan, he decided to make it free and he put it online. So I basically downloaded a lot of that content and I'll just go through it at home. So I became a self-taught programmer at a very young age, and I yet did not know what being an entrepreneur meant. But I think my very first startup was when I was now around in Form 1, when I made this e-learning site. So basically what I would do is I would take all these textbooks and then just digitize them, put them online, download all these past papers, digitize them, put them online. And at the time, I really didn't think this would go anywhere. And I just started getting a lot of users because I could tell someone actually accessed the website from Pakistan, someone accessed the website from India, someone accessed the website from South Africa, because this was all this IGCSE Cambridge course. Right. It wasn't allowed because Cambridge then ended up going really hard against companies and websites that used to put their content online. That's when I learned what copyright infringement was. But for me, it was a very good intro into this world of entrepreneurship. And from that point onwards, I've just been starting things. An interesting point about me is I've never had a job. I've never handed in my CV anywhere. From that age onwards, I knew that my purpose in life would be to build companies, to build solutions. Right? I feel that that is what God personally assigned me to do. I was born and raised in a family of faith, and I do believe every individual on the planet, is bestowed particular gifts and skills so that they ought to use them for the benefit of society. And for me personally, I feel my skills are to be used in the context of Africa and how best we could move Africa forward. Because I also want to see that version of Wakanda that everyone seems to be excited about when they go to the movie theater. For me personally, I want to see it happen, and I want to be an instrument making sure that even future generations are proud to be Zimbabwean, proud to be African.
So Wakanda's coming, and it's coming from Zimbabwe. So before I get onto your companies, Victor, just a little bit about what you were saying. When you talk about parenting, the responsibility of Zimbabwean parents, it means a lot to me as well, because we're all born in different circumstances. But a lot of Zimbabweans, the majority of Zimbabweans, are born poor, with very little, around them, very little resources. In fact, it would surprise the listeners that I was born in Mazoe. And in fact, I wasn't born in Mazoe. I was born in Mboya Nahanda in Paraneto Hospital, believe it or not. I went there the other day to show my team where I was born. And my dad was a miner in Mazoe, so we had to move back to the mine a few days after I was born. And we lived in a mud hut with a grass roof. And my mom actually cooked on a wooden fire. And as a white guy, Murungu, Mukiwa, it's unusual to have that kind of start. But that must relate to a lot of Zimbabweans, that have nothing. And yet, look at where I am today. Look at where you are today. We are blessed, so we talk about faith. We talk about, God in this. But more importantly, we're talking about having the ability to believe in yourself. So just take me back to that young age when you were, a young teenager. You just started learning coding. From what I'm hearing, you're actually a programmer, so you're a software engineer. So how did you feel back then as a young kid? What were you thinking in your mind about what would happen in the future?
So there's a beauty about being very young, which is you're very naive. And when you're naive, you have a lot of hope and you're extremely optimistic about the future. I think for a lot of people that become adults, they lose that as they age. When I was at that age, I didn't understand the significance of what a macroeconomic situation meant. I didn't understand what macro socio-political issues meant. I was just a kid who was building websites. I was a kid who wanted to build a chatbot. I was a kid who wanted to build apps. I was a kid who wanted to build games, right? And I grew up, this is at the time when you heard stories of your Mark Zuckerbergs, right? This dorm room success story where you had this kid and his friends build companies that are now worth billions, if not trillions of dollars. And I said to myself, there's absolutely nothing special about all these people that we cannot replicate here. And I personally took it upon myself to try as much as possible to aim in that particular direction. So even when it comes to role models, right, I decided to look for individuals whose stories I could relate to. Sure, this could be some white guy, who's, in the East Coast of the United States with absolutely no relation to Zimbabwe. The same is true. You probably have someone, in Morocco out there who could read Ken Sharpe's story and actually get, that, level of correlation. So for me at that age, I was just thinking, how best can I achieve these, humongous goals I had? The difficulty of setting up a company, I didn't understand. The difficulty of accessing investment, I didn't understand. The difficulty of even managing a company and operationalizing it, I didn't understand that. And I didn't care. And I feel that's where the beauty really comes in, because it's when you just have this raw passion that is, uncorrupted. You have the ability to do things that, traditionally most other people will not do. And, I then developed this level of resilience, and it helped me a lot, especially when I came back to Zimbabwe. Because even to be an entrepreneur, to be a visionary, to be an artist, a musician, to be an actor, actress, whatever it is, you are going to go through circumstances that are going to test your ability to persevere through. So again, when you're much younger, you can just, punch your way through certain things because life has not yet really become apparent to you. And if you carry that on into, later stages in life, you might have an unfair advantage compared to your peers because you don't quit. You are very optimistic. You see the world differently. You see the beauty in things. You don't see problems. When you see a pothole, you're thinking to yourself, if there's 1,000 potholes in Harare, this is probably an opportunity to start some kind of construction company. When you see people living in mud huts, you're thinking to yourself, there's an opportunity to start constructing, modern housing, right? And learn how to do that more cost effectively. That's how I see the world. That's how I see society. And it really started at that young, naive age. And I tend to carry that forward.
I love that. So youthful innocence and believing in yourself and hoping for a better future. Not considering the environment you're in, but staying focused on what your heart is telling you. That's what your purpose is, right?
Yeah.
And just coming back to two thoughts that I had. The first one is actually Richard Branson from Virgin. And I thought of his history, how he started his business illegally. I don't know if you've read his biography, but he started it illegally as a student. And he eventually digitalized the music industry. So where we start is not as important as where we end up. And I'm sure those iterations, those learning curves for you in FlexID, because I want to get to talk a bit about FlexID, is important. But more important than that is your parents. So I can see they've done a great job. And Zimbabwean parents love their children. And I know that everything that our parents do for us is to improve us so that we're better than they were. And Zimbabweans have a habit, I guess, or a culture of investing maximum into their children's education. Education is first. Even above either primary needs, the education always comes first. And I read a book talking about Harvard. We'll talk about that in a minute because turns out I'm also an alum of Harvard. But there's a professor there, and I'm sure you've heard of him, Clayton Christensen, the father of innovation. Yes. And you've probably read The Innovator's Dilemma. Yes. Have you read his latter book called How You'll Measure Your Life?
Not yet.
I recommend you to read it. Yeah. He was a man of faith, and in the book, he didn't talk much about his faith, but he talked about sort of the philosophies of life. And he got onto the place in this book where he talks about how we should bring up our children. And he says, if we want to make our children, it's not what we do for them that will make them, but it's what we don't do for them that makes them. And just think about that for a minute, right? What you're saying about going through the adversity, the trials, the difficulties, struggling. If it wasn't for all those things, would you be who you are today?
No, definitely not. I feel, for me, I started experiencing difficulty even at an institutional level when I was in high school, right? Because again, I'm this kid who believes he can change things. And, my first, sort of feel at obstacles and indifference was when I started this club with a friend of mine at school, which was called Second Generation Africa. And what we wanted to do was very simple. We said, look, we want to train all these young people into entrepreneurship. And we want to train them to be, self-sustainable. But what the authorities, thought we were saying is we're telling people to ditch school. Don't go to university and just start a business. And obviously that didn't go down very well. But I stood my ground and I was able to, to convince at least 100 kids at the time to actually join our mission. And I thought to myself, if this works at my school, why not just franchise this thing? So I then spent a significant part of the term, which again did not go well with my authorities at school, traveling across schools in Zimbabwe, coming to Harare, going to all these schools and just pitching this concept of second gen, right? To say, look, guys, we can actually, do better things with our lives and in the future. So, facing that hardship at such a young age, it wasn't easy. There are moments where I felt very depressed. There are moments where I felt like, maybe, I am this insubordinate individual who needs to be tamed. But then there'll be a voice that just says to me, nah, man, you just continue doing what you're doing. It's gonna be fine. So I just never stopped. I just never quit. I think for me, those moments where, it was either I had to stop doing what I was doing and passionate about and just sort of follow the traditional way, or just do things my own way. And it's when I crossed that path that I realized that, look, there is no such thing as an obstacle that cannot be overcome. Difficult times are during a particular period of time. It's not permanent. At some point in the future, if you keep at it, if you keep working towards what you want to achieve, it's going to pass. So definitely, I think hardship, even when it comes to diamonds, right? They are formed under extreme pressure. But when you look at a refined, polished diamond, it's beautiful. When you look at how it even reflects on your eyes, right? It's amazing. But to believe that there was so much pressure that made it over billions of years, most people don't want to believe that. So same thing with any successful individual, whether it's in business, sport, whatever it is, you have to go through that pressure. It's what's going to make you shine.
And to think about that ugly piece of carbon that becomes that beautiful gem.
Yeah.
And I love the reflection of diamonds. I also wanted to mention pearls. I don't know if you know this, but a pearl in a mollusk, which is the shell where it's formed, the muscle is actually irritated by the grain of sand that gets into it. And that irritation, it coats every time the sand from the irritation, and eventually it becomes a beautiful pearl.
Wow.
So when we talk of disruption or irritating the industry, it's part of the game. It's part of what has to happen. It's part of the cycle of life, right? You can't become the pearl without the irritation. And likewise, gold, it's refined in huge amounts of temperature and pressure. So coming back to these thoughts of mine, when we think of ideas and when we think of failure, how do you find the strength? Nelson Mandela said, a famous quote of his was, "Don't judge me by the number of times I fall down, but rather by the number of times I get up again." And in my own life, I've fallen down many times. I've come short many times. I've failed many times. I've gone bankrupt twice, personally and in the company. And I feel like those things that I fell down actually helped me appreciate how to get up again. And every time I got up, I was stronger. How does that relate to you? Every time you've had to face a challenge, a hardship, a difficulty, you reach a hurdle, you reach a boundary, reach a brick wall, how do you deal with it? Where is your source of strength?
So I think for me, I've had multiple pillars that I've seen as helpful in my journey. The first pillar really, has been my parents. So unfortunately, I lost my dad when I was now 17, when I was in law 6. And, for a long time, he had been, very supportive of me. And I feel he did a great job because, even after his passing, for me, I didn't fall under the pressure, although it was a very depressing time, arguably the hardest time I've ever had to go through at such a young age. But 3 months, after his passing, I found myself at Yale University. And, I had to be amongst, 200 other extremely talented kids from all over the world. Very competitive. I'm talking about the best
Cutthroat.
Of the best. Cutthroat. These kids had patents at a young age. They had companies. They were doing amazing things. They wrote books, etc. And you can even feel that imposter syndrome to say, do I even deserve to be here? I'm just this kid from Mutare, from Zimbabwe, a place most people could not even point on a map. So why am I here? Even though I'm going through this grief and I'm going through all this difficulty. And personally, that's where my second pillar comes in, which is my faith. I personally believe that, God has a plan for every individual, and He listens, right? He listens. There's this concept, it's written about in other books, but I think it's also even where prayer itself stems from, right? That you just have to speak it into the universe. When you say something, the universe listens. God listens. And if you keep saying something repeatedly over and over again, eventually it's going to materialize. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. It could be 5 years from now, but it's going to happen because you have made your claim. And it's only up to God now to fulfill that. So if you have your own self-doubts, say them out loud, right? That's what I do. So each time I go through a very difficult, time, I think to myself, I've been here before. I've gone through worse. I've cried. I've done it all, but I never quit. And I think that's where my third pillar now comes in, which is personally, I'm this individual who will not quit. I'm not sure if you've ever watched the Leonardo DiCaprio movie called The Revenant, where he's just thrown in the jungle. And he has to survive after.
I've got to watch it. I haven't, but it sounds interesting.
Yeah. So I personally feel like, for me, I just don't quit, regardless of the circumstance. I'll just keep pushing. I'm that individual who I'm willing, and I have been in situations where I was the last person left in my company, and I had to build it all from scratch again. So It's very, it's exciting, but it's also very hard at times.
I can relate to that. Perseverance is one of the things that I have inherently as a quality. And I believe anyone in business, especially entrepreneurs, need to be able to stand the test of time. And having that gut that says, I've got the will, I'm going to carry on no matter what, I'll continue until I achieve that goal. Bringing us back to that thought of an idea. I love the poet Victor Hugo, who says, there's nothing as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And obviously your idea and time has come. And if we come back to the FlexID, tell us a little bit about your company. How did you start it up, and what was your initial, let's say, your business plan, or what was your service going to be providing, and how did you iterate from the original concept to actually what it's become?
Yeah. So the story of FlexID is a very personal one. So after Yale University, I went to MIT, where I was doing programs in computer science, in programming, and in business as well at Sloan Management School. And that's the first time I was introduced to this blockchain technology and crypto. But at the time, everyone was saying, this is speculative, this is not going to survive, this is a fad, it's not going anywhere. And after that, I did an exchange program at King's College in London, where I had some really intense technical and engineering professors, again, that would dive deep into this technology. And they mentioned something interesting. They said, look, whoever built this technology called Bitcoin, because the guy who made it called Satoshi Nakamoto, no one knows who he is. But the key thing in there was this issue of financial inclusion and decentralizing systems. Right. And he said, I personally feel in developing countries, these people would understand this much better. And I felt that, right? Because I came from that society. So when I came back to Zimbabwe, I was now in the process of trying to set up my life. And, one of the things about setting up your life is you need a bank account, right? So I walked into one of the famous bank branches.
I name them?
Well, I work with them now, so
okay,
very tricky. So I walked into the branch and I thought, this is going to take 30 minutes. Maybe if these guys are incompetent, maybe an hour, right? I got the forms, started filling them in. Now, there's this thing called proof of residence. I'm sure a lot of people in Zimbabwe know this. If you don't own a house, it's very hard to get. Either you have to print out your ZESA bill and then your name has to appear there. And I was living with my mom, so I was, nothing was in my name. And I was like, this is ridiculous, guys. You can't keep asking for archaic information like this. So I said, it's for our KYC. We need this. So I went to another bank, right? And then I got the forms again. I got stuck, went to another bank. And then I realized there's something absolutely broken here, right? When someone wants to access financial services, the amount of hurdles and obstacles they have to go through just to become a customer is utterly ridiculous.
Absurd.
And I realized this was an industry-wide problem. And FlexID then organically materialized from that. And I said to myself, look, if I open a bank account with Bank 1, why is it if I want to open an account with Bank 2, I can't use the same information? Because they already did that. And I discovered, number one, banks are not allowed to share your data because there's regulation around that. And the reason really is if your data is sitting in a centralized server somewhere, it becomes extremely tricky to give access to a third party to give that information. But then there's this technology called blockchain, right? Which was started just at that point a decade earlier. And what blockchain is, it's decentralized ledger technology, which means data doesn't have to sit in a central server somewhere. Right. Instead, it can even sit with the consumer. It can sit with the actual customer. And it eliminates that problem, that regulatory hurdle of an individual being able to share their information with anyone they want to. And then FlexID was then born. And what FlexID is, it's a digital identity wallet that allows a normal individual to store digital credentials about themselves. So it can be your banking information, your KYC. So you go to Bank A, you register an account. What Bank A would do if they use our platform is they'll be able to generate your digital identity and issue it back to you via your wallet. Right? And if you want to open an account with a third institution or a fintech or sign up on a crypto exchange, they don't have to go through that strenuous process of doing KYC again. With our platform, it's one click, right? So opening an account becomes basically, something instead of taking you a few hours or a few days, it's now just taking you a few minutes. You're done. Same thing for healthcare. You go to your doctor, they're going to generate your prescription, they're going to generate your healthcare records. With our platform, they're able to issue those digital credentials directly to you. Right? And what it means is that over time, you have all these different credentials about you. Number one, that can be monetized. So you're able to even sell your data to a third party and earn from that. And two, it makes it extremely easy for institutions to onboard new clients and allow them to actually onboard individuals at a much faster rate than they traditionally would be able to do. So FlexID was then born. And essentially from that point onwards, it was very difficult at first, right? Because it was a very new idea. Right. So I thought to myself, how best do we implement this? So our first target market was microfinance companies. Why? Because microfinance companies, a lot of them in Zimbabwe don't have a lot of digital platforms. So they really do rely on this sort of, archaic method of being able to onboard customers. And a lot of individuals in Zimbabwe being informal, they don't have these credentials with them. You cannot ask a person who works at Mbare to give you their payslip. They just cannot do that, right? But they might earn money. So how best do you then design a platform that can make this person even credit worthy, right? If you want to get a home in a developed country, usually they want to see your credit, right? Very different here. But as we progress even, that market, we're going to need to start having these, this data and these credentials available. So we went for the microfinance companies, and then they had this problem of double borrowing. Victor will go to Ken, he borrows. Victor goes to Simon, he borrows. Victor goes to Susan, he borrows. And Victor defaults. Or sometimes it just vanishes, right? Because his address, you cannot verify it. And then you have to send people after Victor and then get his furniture and all that. And our platform would solve that because that single digital ID would allow any third party to verify information about that person. And we then gradually evolved. As we got more confident with our technology, we started approaching much bigger players, and namely banks, because banks essentially are the biggest possible market, same with the telco companies. But I quickly realized this problem is beyond Zimbabwe, right? In Africa, at least 500 million people do not even have a formal ID. So you have the population, which is double of Nigeria, basically being unable to access financial services. They can't access insurance. They can't get homes. And at times they can't even get medical treatment because no one knows who these people are, right? It's very difficult. So I realized FlexID is bigger than Zimbabwe. It's bigger than SADC. It's a global company, and it must be a global company. And that's when I made the decision to actually incorporate it in a global market, which is in Singapore, and start building subsidiaries in all the other countries that we operate.
And timeline from startup to being in Singapore, how long was that?
3 years.
3 years, that's fast. That's fast.
So 2 years of pure experimentation, iteration, failure, tears, blood, sweat, all that. It was, just going through all those different iterations. So when we built FlexID, our first version was actually through WhatsApp, because we said everyone uses WhatsApp. And then there are WhatsApp bundles. So you don't have to worry about a person saying, I don't have data to download your app. Right. So let's just launch it through WhatsApp. And then let's build the app
Very
afterwards.
Innovative.
Yeah, which is what we need in Africa.
How many did you get signups through WhatsApp?
So with WhatsApp now, we have over 100,000.
100,000?
Over 100,000.
That is incredible.
And it's mainly in the medical sector, also in financial services. And now we're essentially scaling up the company. So earlier this year, we managed to raise our pre-seed round from some venture capitalists. And now we're in the process of scaling up our operations.
And would you mind disclosing what amount you got?
So let's just say it put our valuation in the 7 figures.
Wow! Congratulations!
And I was
I got goosebumps.
For me and my team personally, it had been a long time coming. Raising funding when you're in Zimbabwe is very hard. Raising funding when you're black is very hard. So you have to go through multiple hurdles, obstacles for people to even believe that, you do actually have the capacity to do what you're claiming to do. And then for them to be able to trust you with capital. I think a lot of people also just don't understand that when you're an entrepreneur, you are a steward of people's capital.
Right.
And what it means is that, you carry this responsibility, this fiduciary duty to deliver. Right? Entrepreneurship isn't just about the lifestyle. It's not about the conferences, the magazines and all that. There's a whole lot more responsibility associated with that. And I had to learn that. I had to adapt to that. And I had to even change my character and personality to make sure I'm the best
Great
version.
for you having the foresight to see that Singapore, because I'm just imagining there was a lot less resistance of your investor going into a Singapore company than a Zimbabwean one.
Yes.
And many Zimbabweans out there don't know that it's not really your product or your service that is the question, it's the country. And the country risk is perceived as very high, but there's nothing stopping Zimbabweans registering a company in Singapore or in Dubai or in London or in New York, and that gives the investors a lot more confidence to invest into that company. Where was your investor from, if you don't know? What country, what source of funds?
So my investors were in Singapore and from the United States.
Fantastic.
So, the whole investment was easy. They sent the funds via cryptocurrency, via stablecoin, and that money came in like 5 seconds.
There you go.
Right. So it was, even when it comes to doing business, I was really shocked. I saw this amount of money in my crypto wallet, and I'm thinking to myself, these people actually send me this money.
What am I going to do with it?
They actually send me this money, So I actually have quite a lot of work that I have to do. But for me, it did give me a boost in terms of my energy and confidence. Because now
you've done it.
We're able to be operational now.
Series A.
Now we need to grow. We need to scale. This is just the beginning.
Well, you've scaled, Victor. Let's be honest. So let's talk to the people out there who don't know much about technology companies. But the startup phase is really important. So you talked about meeting a genuine need. So you identified the banks that they were archaic, they had these paperwork, systems weren't working. So you saw there's a real need, just like Uber, right? The guy was at the airport, realized that there was no taxis around, there's a need to start a company, a call company, right? So you've seen the need, you've identified the need. It's a real need. And I think that's so important with technology companies. Don't just go search for things, find things that really have a need. And then you met the need of the customer. And obviously you tested it, so you iterated it, you changed your model slightly, you improved the service, you started in WhatsApp, eventually launched the product. And once you've launched and you've proved it to be successful, you scale it. But you've said 100,000 people. I've heard there's 300,000 users of FlexID in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's already at scale. So now what are you going to do? When you're talking of scale, what is in your mind?
So scale to us is at least reaching 100 million users in the world in the next 5 years, which is a very ambitious goal. But we believe that it's attainable. We believe that it's achievable because the problem is real. Everywhere in the world I've traveled, that problem exists, even in developed economies, right? They'll be like, what? FlexID could work here. Why aren't you here yet? And I'll say to them that, we are an African company, but an African company with a global focus. So we'll get there.
Powerful.
And this is why, for me, Zimbabwe was a sandbox market, right? Why? Because this is home. I'm familiar with the people, the language. I can get into a meeting. We can talk about things, understanding context very well. And it allowed us to experiment also very economically. A lot of people want, to start companies in foreign markets, etc. But there's a huge risk to that in the sense that, if things don't go well, you can't just go back to your mom's house and eat sadza in the evening. You actually have, a lot more in terms of cost. Everything costs you money. In Zimbabwe, not everything costs money, especially connections, right? You have people in your community that you can talk to. I built this product. How best do you think I can make it work? Which is one thing I then realized that even in Zimbabwe, we will need continuous development of, which is an ecosystem building. Now, when we look at this issue of funding, a lot of companies feel it's all about finances. But I realized from my journey that in Africa and in Zimbabwe, scaling is about partnerships, right? It's about partnerships. So for example, let's say I develop a platform. I realize that people might not have the money to buy a house, right? But they still want a solid investment. So I'm going to build a platform which is going to allow people to invest in, tokenized real estate, for example. It's going to cost them $10, $20, $100, whatever amount of money you have. Whatever amount of money you have, we want you to invest. But I'm not a property developer. I don't have any experience in that industry. If I go to an investor and I say, give me money, what am I getting that money to do? Because if it's to build the platform, then I won't need much. I might not even need the money. What if I need to go to the market? Again, I might actually not need the money to do that. What I need are partners, right? I need to find someone like Ken and say, hey, Ken, do you want this thing?
Access.
And Ken says yes. And if he says yes, then we have an MVP. That's how you're validating your product. And that's what makes it investable. So again, even if we want to make Zimbabwe a market that is attractive to venture capital, it's about building those ecosystems that allow access. To say, if I build a solution in healthcare, if I build a solution in agriculture, how quickly can I scale it? Who are the partners with the resources and infrastructure to allow me to scale? And I think for entrepreneurs in Africa and in Zimbabwe, this is very important because it might not be money that you need, but you need the right partners. And don't be afraid to go to individuals, even if they say no, right? It's important that you make that conversation and you start that conversation. I still talk to companies that rejected our solution earlier on, but now, I'm having much more productive conversations with them because we never stopped that engagement. We never stopped having those conversations. So extremely important. Capital is in two ways. It can be in the form of liquidity, but most importantly, in the form of the relationships and partnerships that you build for your company.
And coming back to that question of monetizing, one of those things in the tech companies, at some point you should monetize. We know that places like Amazon, of course, for, 15 years didn't make a profit, and yet their valuation was hundreds of billions of dollars. So how in a tech company do you monetize your business? So where's your revenue coming from? Who's paying for your services? Does it cost the customer? Does it cost the banks? Tell us a bit about how it's working.
Yeah, so we have a very interesting business model. It's free for the users. Why? Because we don't want to create obstacles and barriers to entry. Because that's the challenge we're solving in the first place, access. So if you're building solutions for inclusion, the first thing you want to do is to minimize the obstacles that your consumer is going to face. So in terms of cost and also in terms of the technology itself, we actually then charge the institutions that use FlexID either to issue these digital credentials or to perform verifications. And we realize there's much more demand for verifications than there is the actual issuance.
Right.
And this came about when I received an email from the largest crypto exchange in the world called Binance. And they reached out to us and they said to us, look, are you guys in these 35 African countries? If so, we're ready to start working with you. And I'm thinking to myself, man, we're barely in Zimbabwe. But they had read about FlexID and automatically they thought we could solve their KYC problems for Africa. And I immediately realized the value in what we're building, and I realized that someone was willing to pay for it. And not just pay a small amount of money, but pay very lucratively. So we decided to focus on making sure we build the solution to work for institutions, these financial institutions, the telco companies, the microfinance companies, and even the startups that are just starting, right? To make it easier for them to onboard customers because they don't have the same resources. They can't build bank branches all over the country, right? They might just have the resources to manage one or two machines. So we've built FlexID for them to also be cost effective. So FlexID's cost for verification is currently less than 10 cents.
Amazing. Right?
And the cost of onboarding a usual customer when you do KYC is more than $1.25, right? And in some cases, it can go up to, it's absolutely, when it comes to cost saving, it's one of the most economic solutions in the market right now. It's extremely cheap and it allows institutions to quickly scale up.
So is it costing, let's say your client, is it costing them a once-off fee, or is it a subscription model where they continually pay based on the number of users they bring into your platform? Or how does that work?
Yeah, so it's pay as you go, right? So as you scale up and you manage more and more individuals in your network, you just pay as you do that. We do charge a one-time integration fee for larger institutions where we actually have to make some solid integrations. When you integrate with banks, for example, it's not a very easy process. There's a lot of security involved. There's a lot of issues to do with privacy. So again, you have to build, all these VPNs to make sure that, your network that you're communicating with is not exposed to potential hackers and all that. FlexID itself, because it uses this blockchain technology, is extremely safe. So we don't keep any customer's data. The customer keeps their own data on their device. This is where the decentralized part of it comes in. And what this means is you cannot hack it, right? You would need to hack every single device on our network, which is, technically speaking, pretty impossible. So it allows us to also scale without having this issue of legacy infrastructure that we have to deal with. And which is another advantage of technology in Africa. you find that because our companies and our institutions have not progressed, quite a lot, they lack this legacy infrastructure, which you find problematic in a first world country. So you go to America, you tell them about FlexID, they'll be like, look, man, we're still using a mainframe that's running on COBOL, right? And no one touches that computer. Because if someone touches it and it goes off, billions of dollars are at risk. But in Africa, you're just going to go to a microfinance company and they don't even have a system. So you have this opportunity for greenfield development, which is a blue ocean opportunity. If anyone has ever read the Blue Ocean Strategy, you realize that you want to be in markets that are not dominated by a lot of legacy players. Instead, you want to operate in blue oceans, which are pretty free to innovation, there's less regulation, and there are less obstacles. So definitely operating in those blue oceans has been a major advantage for us at FlexID.
So route to market, what is your marketing game? How do you get to your clients?
B2B. So we're a B2B company. So because we don't charge users, we go direct for the institutions. Mm-hmm. So our users are acquired via the institutions we work with. So for example, if we work with the university and say they have 10,000 students and they now want to issue digital transcripts and digital degrees, they can do that via FlexID. Right. So all those 10,000 students automatically become FlexID users. But here's the beauty. Because we have other service providers, right, such as financial institutions, healthcare institution, that same student can now open a bank account. Mm-hmm. That same student can now do financial transactions. That same student can now access digital health services. So it doesn't limit them to that way in which they were onboarded. They are now exposed to this universe of different applications. And we're just continuously building it out.
And you have people on the ground, so your business development team, your sales team will be in Zimbabwe knocking on doors?
100%. I used to do that myself. So the first year of the business, I was driving a blue Honda Fit, very cost efficient at the time. And I would dress very formally like yourself. And I would just, go to banks, go to microfinance companies, organizations, pitch them FlexID. I did that nonstop, getting no.
Until?
You cannot see the CEO.
So who's the first one who said yes?
Yeah, so the first one that said yes is the bank that refused to open my account the very first time.
I love that. That's fantastic.
And that was in 2020. And we actually then started working with them to offer e-commerce services. And that became sort of a major turning point for us commercially because we managed to get a lot of experience. We also managed to get revenue. And we also managed to now just build out our reputation within the wider industry. So keep knocking on the doors. You're going to get a lot of no's. But when that one yes happens, that's the yes that changes everything. And you better be ready for that yes. Because when it comes, it expects you to do what you've been saying the whole time. Right? It's not just about, saying the best pitch. It's also now about delivering. So that's also another aspect to the game that when you make the first win, it's not the only win. You now have to win again. So entrepreneurship is about continuous wins. Mm-hmm. Just because you won the World Cup in 2018 does not mean you're going to win it again in 2022. So let's see how that goes.
Perseverance pays.
Yeah.
And they say the darkest moment is just before dawn. And you don't know when that last no is going to be a yes. So don't stop until you get the yes. But coming back to the banks, I'm going to be talking to some bankers in this town in a little bit of few series down the road. This, by the way, is the first one. So I'm honored to have you as my first guest. But as we get talking about the financial services in Zimbabwe, we're going to be talking about the unbanked and the undeserved. So as a message to the banks out there, if I was to ask you, looking at crypto, looking at blockchain, looking at what you've done, what would you do if you were a bank? How would you bring the services of a bank to the people at the least possible cost and apply the most efficient route to get it to the people?
I love that question. The first thing I would do is realize that I'm a bank. And because I'm a bank, I have access to infrastructure and resources that a traditional fintech or a startup is not going to have access to. So number one, actually build out a service division which just builds out APIs for third parties to come in. Because what you want to do is you want someone else to innovate on your behalf, but using your infrastructure.
Right.
So the best banks in the world that have realized this have started to build out all these free APIs that allow third-party companies to come in and be able to actually start using the infrastructure to onboard customers. If you want to scale, you want people to innovate on your behalf because you cannot monopolize innovation. It's impossible. It's decentralized. So let the victors of the world come in and say, hey guys, I have built this application, but I need access to XYZ such that I'm able to actually bank these individuals and bring you consumers that traditionally you were not going to approach. So that's the first thing I would do. I would actually build out a service model around the entire institution dedicated to onboarding third-party startups. The second thing I would do as an institution is realize that already within my ecosystem, I have particular customers that can aid in further helping individuals get banked. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about your retailers, right? Who can now be used as point of sales. I'm talking about your agents that allow people to buy things like insurance, etc. Using technology, you can turn one agent into a point of sale for hundreds of different financial services. So someone doesn't have to travel from Chitungwiza to Harare CBD so that they go into a branch. Instead, they can just go to their local kiosk or their local tuck shop, and someone has an Android device that is connected to all these APIs, and they're able to have the most basic functionality available to them. And then lastly, we now live in a world of venture capital. And what this essentially means is venture capital targets companies that are going to scale. There is no venture capitalist who's going to put money in a bank because it's limited. But a venture capitalist is going to put money in a fintech that's going to scale. So if I'm a bank, I'm going to build an infrastructure startup from within the bank itself. And what this means is that companies from all over the world that want to target the Zimbabwean market can now do so via my bank. Because if I have 5,000 merchants and someone in the US says, look, I want to provide lending to property companies, but I don't know anyone. I don't have a database of these people. If you're a bank and you have access to that data, you have access to those transactions, you say, hey, you can plug into our APIs and plug into our platform and be able to actually acquire these consumers. So what technology will allow financial institutions to do is to now evolve from being traditional brick and mortar institutions to now become infrastructure companies, because that's really what they are. But the infrastructure is now different. The infrastructure must be digital, and the infrastructure now must be related to data. So I definitely would build on those three pillars. Number one, opening up collaboration for third parties to come in. Number two, making sure that the bank itself is now structured in a manner that also operates looking at scale. That's extremely important. So I definitely do believe financial institutions have a massive opportunity. Cryptocurrency is a big threat to centralized finance, and it will eliminate centralized finance. Today, I don't bank personally. I use crypto exchanges to do a lot of my transactions. It's fast. I can move hundreds of thousands of dollars in 3, 4, 5 seconds. I can buy digital assets and trade them all over the world in a few seconds, and I have my funds. I've even sold, domain names. I've sold assets to people in Nigeria, to people in India, and all the transactions happened online. We never met. We never signed a contract. Everything just happened seamlessly. So when you live in a world where someone can move $1 billion of Bitcoin and just be charged $30 in fees,
amazing.
That means that, the world has changed. So don't be against technology. It's just a tool. Cryptocurrency is not here to replace you. It's here to evolve you. So do not look at these technologies as threats, but look at them as opportunities to now build up your businesses to be global facing. Because now it's borderless.
Right.
If your bank is offering these digital services and crypto services, someone from Pakistan can use your service, right? And what that means is you have been able to outgrow even your geographic limitations. Teapot, Zimbabwe, 15 million people. About 10 million economically active adults. We are children compared to the Nigerias of the world, babies compared to the Indias of the world, and basically non-existent compared to the Chinas of the world in terms of scale. So you want to build a business that looks at scale, and that is also going to be, very competitive at a global level. I'm not impressed by, being, say, the best fintech company in Zimbabwe. to me, that doesn't mean anything, right? It means that I've just, in my neighborhood, I've managed to do quite well. But what I really want is to become the best in Africa, the best in the world, because we can do that. There's nothing that says we can't. The Tatars of the world are now even sponsoring buildings at Harvard. These are Indian companies. At some point in time, no one ever thought an Indian company would be able to build.
Well, let me tell you this. I stayed in the penthouse suite when I graduated this year in Tata.
Yeah.
And it's on the top floor. And the Americans have allowed the graduates of HBS to continually rise up through the buildings until you get to Tata at the end of your course. So they respect Tata. Exactly. But coming back to the question of the bankers in Zimbabwe, I hope you're paying attention. If you want to be a global player, if you want to make a difference in Zimbabwe, listen to the future. And that nugget that you've given, for me, is all about inclusivity. The days of exclusion of old school thinking is gone, right? The days of exclusivity. The more inclusion you have in your business, the more chance of you having it be successful and technologically advanced. So coming to one more question before we move on to a personal question and then close. In the banking sector, if you were the Reserve Bank governor, let's say you were Dr. John Mangujka, or you were the Minister of Finance, and you were looking at the banking sector in 2008, 2009, just when we had this crash, wiped out savings, wiped out the deposit books, what would you be saying to the banks on how you can regain the people's trust? And what kind of policies would you put in place to regain the people's trust?
So Zimbabwe has 15 million proven tons of gold under the ground, which equates to around $500 trillion. Yet, you will not find confidence in any currency that materializes from the central bank. Now, the reasons why is because trust itself is a currency. And when people do not trust institutions and when people lose trust in systems, it becomes extremely difficult. Even the best ideas will find a very hard time getting adoption. So the main issue is, how do you now build a framework that brings back the trust from your depositors? Because depositors fundamentally create the industry. The industry was created from a necessity of depositors to put in their funds. The first thing I would do is I would look at, what do we have already? And we have a lot of natural resources, but our natural resources are exported in exchange for Forex, which we then use to go buy luxurious products, which we use to pay for DSTV, which we use to buy fuel. And a lot of these things to most people are necessary. Someone wants to do whatever they want with their money, but is it productive? How do we reserve some of those assets so that we can actually build trust within our currency? So I would look at the gold, for example. A lot of it goes to Dubai. But what are they doing with the gold once it gets into Dubai? They're now digitizing some of these gold reserves. You go to DMCC, they've digitized a lot of gold reserves. And what it means is that someone from all over the world can buy the gold without it ever having to leave Dubai. And what does that mean? It means, number one, you have increased a new method of getting revenue via those electronic transactions, but you are building up reserves that allow you to say, look, guys, whatever instrument, whether it's a currency we launch into the market, it's fundamentally backed by these natural resources. And we haven't been able to successfully do that. Number two, I would liberalize the entire financial sector. Liberalize it, do not overregulate. Innovation will always precede regulation. So you want to watch innovation happen, learn, and then be able to draft regulation. We made a big mistake with cryptocurrency in this country. By 2017, Zimbabwe had extremely large volumes of cryptocurrency transactions. We even had companies in Zimbabwe that were almost about to be valued at extremely high, large market caps. And then overnight, it died. And what happened? Those transactions moved to South African platforms, companies such as Vala, which are now worth hundreds of millions of US dollars, and Luna, which is now worth billions of dollars. And we didn't manage to capture value. Because what our society needs right now, it needs value and it needs investment. But we have to be realistic. No one wants to invest in the traditional industries anymore. It's just not exciting to go to Silicon Valley and pitch them Cisco Steel. They don't want to invest in that. They want to invest in blockchain companies. They want to invest in crypto companies. So you want to create legislation and framework which actually supports this new kind of capital to come in. It's not doing business as usual. And third, I would encourage the banks to implement this open banking practice. Open banking, meaning you have to make those APIs available. If a fintech wants to build a solution using bank data, so long as they have the customer's consent, they should be able to do that. We should not encourage monopolies in our small society. Instead, we should encourage collaboration. There is no reason why institutions ought to operate in different silos, yet we have a very small market, but a lot of human capital. So we want to make it easy. A university student at UZ, wherever they are, they should be able to start hacking around and building applications using these open banking practices. It's happening in Europe, it's happening in Singapore. Even my company immediately got access to banking APIs in Singapore, and I'm a Zimbabwean. And I'm saying to myself, why would they even allow me to do this? It's because they understand that when you build solutions, when your companies raise money, when the valuations go up, you create employment, you build trust within the system, because now people can see that our central bank is trying to push for value creation instead of just value capture, which is a fundamental difference. So if I was sitting in that position, I definitely would look at, number one, liberalizing the sector. Two, ensuring that innovation is not capped. Remove the ban on cryptocurrencies in Zimbabwe. It's unnecessary. The Zim dollar has fluctuated more than Bitcoin in the past year, right? And, they'll say Bitcoin is not a currency. So what is our own currency then if it's inflating and it's just fluctuating like that? And I'm not saying this to dismiss the efforts of the policymakers. I'm saying this so that they can actually see there's another way we can help them, because I'm not sitting in public office. I cannot make these decisions. The best I can do is I can build you technology, I can bring you innovation, and I can present it to you. But adoption really then depends on what our policymakers then put forward. And this is what, this is why I came back to Zimbabwe in the first place, is to push that agenda, to say, look, guys, we're here to help you solve these problems. You don't have to be thinking about how do we digitize gold. I can do that for you.
Yeah.
If you open up that space, we should be able to start having that dialogue and that conversation.
Well, you've heard it, ladies and gentlemen. Are you Gen X?
Gen Z. Gen Z.
Gen Z. So it's a Gen Z. I'm a millennial, and we now have Alpha. So we're the future.
Yeah.
I'm the oldest part of the future. You in the middle part, and the Alpha's out there. He has the leadership for you. He has the role model. Follow this man. Last question on a personal note. I want you to tie together where you were born, what your totem means to you, where you've been in the world. So we've traveled. We talked about it. You spent 3 months of the year here. I spent about the same. You spent a lot of time in different countries. What do you want to tell the audience today about where you come from, who you represent, and where you're going?
So I was born and raised in a small town in Mutare. And this young man who comes from the Ziva clan, the Save people, found himself in the halls of Yale, where the Hillary Clintons went to school. I found myself at MIT, where some of the best minds in the world gathered, at Harvard, at World Economic Forum, in Davos, in Singapore. I've spoken at many global events, and I'm in my 20s. I did this not because I had some unfavorable advantage, but because I realized where I came from is not a limitation, but it's an advantage. My story inspires people to be able to take action based on what I would have said. And that is the power that we all have. And that is the power that you as an individual also have. Your story is not a limitation. It's not a prison. It's an opportunity for you to keep on building a much better future for yourself. And I hope today you managed to pick up a few things from that experience, and that you really realize that God himself has created this universe for you to take full advantage. Just tell him what you want, tell him what your vision is, tell him what your vision for the entire world is, and he will make it happen. You just have to speak it into existence.
And I'll say amen to that. And for the Zivas out there, the Manikas, you've heard it from this man. There's never no one who can't achieve what their heart sets them. And you've shown it today that you're a man of your heart. You followed your goals, you followed your dreams, and you're getting there. And I wish you the very best. And coming back to the Phoenix podcast today, Zimbabweans, yes, we can do it. You've heard it today from a man who's done it. He's out there on a global platform, making a difference to millions of lives, potentially billions of lives, all the way from Manika land. So, last message to you is, remember that we in Zimbabwe are our greatest asset of our nation. And if not me, then who? If not you, then who? And if not now, then when? Thank you for coming onto my show. It's been a pleasure to have you, Victor.
Thank you, Ken, and God bless you.
Thank you.
Faith, family, business, adventure. This is the Phoenix Podcast with Ken Sharpe.